ain't talking to myself again. But it's the only...
Good afternoon and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith. A special edition of NUFC Matters today with Liam Kennedy. We had a chat a couple of weeks ago and thought this would be a good idea. Chance for you to interact as well, and just gives you a little bit of a fix of Newcastle United on a Sunday when we haven't had a match over the weekend because it's international break. So, Liam, welcome to the show, mate.
Cheers. I've decided to come off witness protection for this particular episode. That was one of the tweets that I got.
Hey,
witness protection, Kennedy.
How funny is that? I mean, for anyone who didn't watch last week's show, Liam was pretty much in. If he's not bright orange, he's in the dark. So we've had it all, like in the light and stakes. But you've got it about right today, mate. So we'll stick with that for now, anyway. Great to have you on, and this special edition, of NUFC Matters is all about the managers under Mike Ashley, and we've seen a lot of stick handed Steve Bruce's way on social media, and that was the idea behind it, really. Let's see who really the public think is the worst Newcastle United manager under Mike Ashley. And we've got a poll running on Facebook at this moment in time. So if you go on to NUFC Matters and join our Facebook group, I'll add you to it. The poll is up and running now. All the managers who've managed under Mike Ashley are up there, and we just want you to vote. And hopefully by the end of this program, we'll have an answer as to who people think is the worst manager. So Mike Ashley arrived at Newcastle, of course, in the summer of 2007. Bought the club from Sir John Hall and Mike Ashley from Freddie Shepherd. So, yeah, who was the first man in the hot seat, Liam?
So obviously it was an incumbent, really. It wasn't one of Mike Ashley's appointments. And we're talking about Sam Allardyce was the first person we roll into. It was almost Freddie Shepherd's last act as being top of the pile in the Newcastle United tree. He brought in Allardyce. It was a really controversial appointment at the time. Turned out to be a very controversial spell as manager. Had its highs at first and then consistent lows. Signed some okay players, but again was a very challenging time on the eye to watch as a Newcastle United fan. And sadly, despite the fact there was a lot of optimism about a new owner, I think we all kind of realise now it was a precursor of things to come. Because by no means has Allardyce been the worst manager, in my opinion, in the Newcastle United time. And that's saying a lot, really. I think at the time when we were watching certain games, one game of that period particularly sticks in my mind, and it was towards the end. It was Boxing Day. Boxing Day, we played Wigan, got beat 1-0, and it was such a painful watch that day. It was a 1-0 game. It might have even been Ryan Taylor got a goal then. But it was such a really difficult watch. It was 1-0. We didn't really have a shot on target the whole game. And that was the kind of game for me that sums up the Sam Allardyce reign. If we're to look at it in stats, which is what we're going to do through this programme, you've got to look at Allardyce. It was 24 games in total in all competitions, his spell. 8 wins in total. Now, the majority of those wins actually came within the first few weeks of the reign. Newcastle got off to one of their best starts in Premier League in Ashley's time in that year. They were really good. I mean, I remember the first day of the season, they went to Bolton, won 3-1, Allardyce's old side, and were fantastic that day. I really looked like that important front line. Mark Viduka was signed that summer. Had done wonders at Middlesbrough and Leeds before that. Came in. I don't know if he scored that day, but also we had other players like Michael Owens and Obafemi Martins and others, and it was quite an exciting time. Had a good bunch of attacking players, Charles and Zogbia and others. It was a really decent side, but Allardyce managed to craft that side into such a turgid watch week in, week out. In total, he had a 33.33% win ratio in his time at Newcastle. So you've got to say that's not the worst by far. It's not the best by far either. But it's a reasonably solid and probably a par for the course during the 13 years of Mike Ashley for managers, because you would say it's exactly comparable with someone like Steve Bruce, also comparable with Alan Pardew, not quite as good, and actually Kevin Keegan's reign was very, very similar, if not quite as good. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on that period were, Steve, because it was a really horrible watch at times, wasn't it, under Allardyce?
It was, yeah. I mean, it wasn't the first choice, and how many times we said that at Newcastle United, where someone isn't the first choice as manager. But he came in, he brought his nutritionists in, he probably had one of the biggest backroom staffs, Sam Allardyce, of anyone who's ever managed Newcastle United. But the football, we knew it was going to be turgid, we knew it was going to be route one at times and direct, and the amount of players that he wheeled and dealed with, again, which we knew he probably would do because of his connections. I always felt it could lead to a bit of an issue, and it proved to be the case, because a lot of those players that he brought in were on ridiculous wages. Some of them were at the back end of their careers and mercenaries, if you like, and as we all know, it ultimately would lead to Newcastle dropping out of the Premier League for the first time since Keegan took them up there. So yeah. The abiding memory of the Sam Allardyce reign is before he got the chop, and the fans in the Milburn paddocks more or less hammering Allardyce and singing "You Don't Know What You're Doing" at Sam Allardyce as he stood basically facing what was going on the pitch, and it wasn't the greatest of times, was it?
No, it wasn't. You touched upon it there, signing mercenaries. I mean, if we look back on the players that he did sign that summer, it was the likes of Viduka was probably the standout, if you want to call it, in that mercenary category. He played 2 seasons at Newcastle, scored 7 or 8 goals, was okay in general, but often too injured and far past his best. His best was at Leeds years and years previous to that. You look at the likes of Jeremy, was one that produced small moments in a Newcastle United career, but again was another who never really held down a position in the side and never really warmed to him as a fan at the time, and was on big wages on a free transfer. There were a couple of positives. I'm trying to think who else there was. Joey Barton came in then, which that wasn't going to class him in the positives, because again he proved somebody on massive wages who Newcastle probably struggled to get rid of in the end. Nicky Butt was another. Alan Smith, these type of players all came in. Then you look at the positives in a sense, and I think one of the ones that you really did pluck out was Jose Enrique. Jose Enrique was an excellent player for the 2 to 3 years that he was on Tyneside, an excellent left back, played a real pivotal role in getting Newcastle United back where they deserved under Chris Hughton. And then also, it's got to be remembered, he did actually sign the Player of the Season that year, which was Habib Bey. He was a surprise capture on. I remember it was a dramatic transfer deadline day, which we don't tend to have many of, and we haven't had many at all of, not in a positive sense anyway, under Mike Ashley. And he did sign a couple of players on that final day, one of them being Habib Bey for quite a low fee from Marseille. And he did turn out to be an excellent player that season. We didn't see much more of him, of course, but that's what happens when you get relegated and players leave. So he was one of those that had to go. But overall, like I say, Allardyce was a really, really painful watch. It felt very akin to a Souness time, who had better players, of course, at the time, but it was that kind of appointment. And it's just the style that Allardyce had at Bolton, the way that he played just jarred so much with what Newcastle United fans really wanted to achieve and aspire to. And he was a really poor choice as manager. And turned out to, in the end, be a very poor appointment. I suppose that kind of like runs on into the next little period, which, as we know, is kind of the tumultuous period in Newcastle's recent history. Appointments, sackings, changes, constant change in the seasons that followed. So obviously there was a little spell for Nigel Pearson. He won one, lost one. Just as a caretaker, that was a 50% win ratio. I'm sure he'll take that and put that on his CV. Then we go into Kevin Keegan. After that, and this is the point that I always make, is that I think this was the idea that Mike Ashley, this didn't always have to be this way, and I don't think it was always destined to be the disaster period that it has been, because I think he appointed Keegan and he kind of got it. He got the idea that Newcastle could bring a legend like Keegan back to the football club and just ignite something. I think he wanted to enjoy himself as an owner of Newcastle United in this period. But ultimately, it proved to be the downfall of Mike Ashley, was, for me, appointing Keegan, because it caused him so many issues in this model that he wanted to put together, with the director of football, lots of people in between him and Keegan making decisions, Jeff Vettery, Tony Jimenez, Dennis Wise, the worst of all. That was a really, really difficult period for Newcastle United fans, because in a sense, we got the man we wanted back, the Messiah, and people laugh at us from outside the area and saying that, but there really is a pull of Kevin Keegan, because he's been the gatekeeper of our hopes and dreams as Newcastle United fans for since the 80s, since he came as a player, and I think it felt like it could have ignited something, but it did anything but, really. I'll go into the stats before I assess the period. So we're talking Keegan Mark II was a 21-game period. That's all it actually was, 21 games in all competitions. 6 wins, 6 draws, 9 defeats, 28.57% win ratio. Like I say, I wasn't around covering Newcastle United at the time. I was a fan. I was in the stands. Speaking to people who were around at the time, they often say that they'd seen him the first time round, and then when he came back the second time round, he just wasn't the same man. And I think it was probably doomed in a sense, in that respect, because it was just a bridge too far for somebody like Keegan, who really does deal and live on, and was a manager of emotion, very much of emotion, and bringing players along with him. He just didn't seem the same, speaking to people who were around at the time. But what I would say is, when you look at the bare facts of the statistics of that season, Newcastle never really got going under Keegan for a little while. But when they did get going, there was 7 of the last 9 games they were unbeaten. They lost the last 2 of that season. And I think the signs were starting to be there that Keegan was getting the right kind of performances out of that team. And I think there was a bit of promise there heading into that summer, the summer that ended it all, in my opinion, and most people's opinion as well. When we all know the stories of what happened that summer. Newcastle United went about signing certain players, signed some good players as well. Jonas Gutierrez, Fabrizio Colacini, and others. Signed some decent players that summer. But it was the James Milner sale that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's been publicised before. I know Terry Mack spoke about it in his book that was out a couple of years ago. Keegan's spoken about it himself to various people. They were of the opinion that if they let James Milner go, they would get somebody in to replace him, somebody of a very, very good standard, and were led to believe that talks had taken place with Bayern Munich to bring in Bastian Schweinsteiger. And as it turned out, they hadn't. There'd been a derisory bid sent across, and it all ended up in tears. And it ended up with Keegan and Terry Mack and the people who were in charge at the time feeling totally sold down the river by the owner. And that trust, once that trust is broken, especially with somebody so emotionally invested in the football club, an emotional manager such as Kevin Keegan, you are never ever going to rebuild that. Then there was signings made we had no knowledge of, with Dennis Wise, Nacho Gonzalez, Cisco, and others, and that was the beginning of the end. It was 2 or 3 days, if I remember rightly, of will he leave? Won't he leave? Has he been sacked? Has he not? And then it turned out there was almost a mutual agreement where he walked, and Newcastle United moved on. A sad time, when you reflect back on it. I don't know what you feel about it, Steve, but it could have been. And I would love to have seen him given a fair opportunity to, and it might not have worked, but I would love to have seen him got that chance.
Yeah, Kevin Keegan, I mean, is the epitome of everything that's positive about Newcastle United. And, he was a legend as a player and a legend as a manager first time round. Mike Ashley rolled the dice. We know he's a gambler. He brought Kevin Keegan back in to either rebuild or to finish a job that he originally started. But it completely backfired on him. And it backfired on him for one reason, because the way that Mike Ashley runs a football club is he runs it like a business. He doesn't run it as a football club. And Kevin had come from the era at Newcastle under Sir John and Freddie, where a checkbook was open, and essentially the players that he wanted, he got. But under the new owner at the time, Mike Ashley, that was never going to be the case. And I think the naivety on Ashley's behalf of bringing in people at the football club who essentially didn't have a background in football, clouded the issue. And bringing the likes of Tony Jimenez and Dennis Wise in particular into the mix was always going to upset Kevin Keegan. And ultimately, it's where the whole Cockney Mafia thing came from. There was a few banners knocked up by supporters, and this rather lopsided view, arrogant view, maybe of some people in the media to suggest that we hate Cockneys is, came from a couple of people who decided to make a banner. It's simply not true. And the relationship between us and so many people from London who came on to become legends at the club tells you that we welcome anyone from down south to St James's Park if they put the effort in. But yeah, getting back to Keegan, it was just probably his biggest mistake. Mike Ashley, I think when he looks back on it, he'll probably regret the day that he asked Kevin to come back, because it was always going to end in tears. And, when John Hall and Freddie had the club, they had, Keegan walk out on them on more than one occasion, and they were giving him money to spend. So, he should have done his homework, should have done his due diligence. Again, should have rang Freddie and Sir John and said, thinking about taking Kevin on, what's the best way of handling this guy. But it's the arrogance of Ashley under in those early days at Newcastle, and it massively backfired because it turned the fans against him as well. A lot of the fans were against him, and from that moment on, getting rid of Keegan, standing in at Highbury necking a pint of lager and wearing a replica top, those days were never going to be repeated. And it left a sour taste in the mouth, as did the legal action, because as we know, legal action was then forthcoming. Keegan won his payout, won his case. And that really was, if there was any trust between the fans and Ashley at that point, it sharp dissolved once, the truth came out, and, people realised that Mike Ashley and the football club at the time lied about the whole Kevin Keegan debacle. So, there was no way back for Ashley after that for me.
No, it was. I think in his eyes, he thought it was going to be the biggest thing he could do for the fans, was bringing back a hero such as Kevin Keegan. And it proved to be the biggest own goal of his time. I mean, we can look back on numerous really awful decisions that Mike Ashley's made in his 13 years, or the people that he's trusted to run the football club have made. But for me, that was probably the worst of all. I remember the feeling when we found out. I can't remember the day. You might be able to help us here, Steve, but I'm sure it was an FA Cup game.
There was a cup game. There was a League Cup game, I think, which hadn't sold very well because obviously Newcastle weren't playing well at the time, and it was that Keegan effect where I did an interview for Simon O'Rourke, I think, for Tyne Tees outside the ground that day, and there was people queuing around the block for tickets. It was like back in the 80s when Kevin signed as a player. It was just that Keegan effect, but likewise, when Kevin left, there was people just standing around the stadium, just looking, bemused, and people holding the chronicle up. Keegan quits, and it was just devastating, really.
So I was there that night. I already had my ticket. I always used to go. It was rubbish, but I've always went to cup games anyway when I was a season ticket holder. And I remember the ticker tape coming on Sky Sports News that night, and the feeling going to the ground that night, having expected it to be just an absolute ball fest write-off, to feel it. Oh, is he going to be in the stand? Or we're going to see him? It really was, and that man does hold something over Newcastle United fans in a really positive sense. And I would just love to think that if everything plays out as we all hope it does play out, and there is some form of takeover, whether it be this one or any other in the future, that Kevin Keegan could be brought back under the wing of the football club and used in a positive sense, because he is such a positive, emotional person, and he does still carry that name around the world, and he could be somebody that really the club could and should use. And one day I would love to see a statue of Kevin Keegan because of that hope and belief that he brought back to the city. Not only in the 80s when he turned up, almost turned up, he was England captain and came down to the second division and then came back as a manager out of the blue. Nobody knew he was coming, and he just brings that real positivity, and he did that day as well. Back in 2008, but again, like we know, it just wasn't to be for him.
No. Then, so if anybody wants to chip in, sorry, Liam, if anybody wants to chip in and vote, pop onto Facebook if you're on there, search NUFC Matters, send a request to join the group, over 4,500 on the group these days, and join the vote. We want to know who you think has been the worst manager under Mike Ashley over the last 13 years. Quite a good start on the vote already. Joe Kinnear is topping the bill. He's on 122. We haven't even come to him yet. Steve McClaren is second place. He's on 12. John Carver is in there on 2. And Sam Allardyce is in there on 2 as well. So joint Steve Bruce in 5th place at the minute. 1 vote apiece for Rafa Benitez and Alan Shearer. But so obviously Kevin leaves. Who steps into the breach then, Liam?
Well, this is the probably the most controversial appointment of the whole period. We've gone from somebody that can ignite a fire on Tyneside, bringing dreams back, to somebody who did the exact opposite. Yesterday's man, old news, Wimbledon's old manager, Joe Kinnear. He was.
We did have a little spell of Chris Hughton in between that, didn't we? Chris stepped in. Chris did step in. It's important to mention that Chris did come in as a caretaker, and that was a sign of things to come. But yeah, you're right. We had the old dinosaur next, didn't we? Joe Kinnear.
So what I'll do with Hughton is, because if you look at it through in a statistical sense, we actually had 3 spells of Chris Hughton. What I'll do is I'll talk about Kinnear, then we'll talk about the 2 caretaker spells of Hughton.
Good stuff.
Then it's Shearer, then we'll go into the proper Chris Hughton period, which was the promotion season 09-10. But Kinnear, I'll go into stats first before we talk about anything else. Let's just deal with that issue first before we talk about the rest. So it was an 18-game period, 4 wins, 8 draws, 6 defeats. Not the worst. I mean, there are worse out there, but a 22.22 win percent. Such a divisive character. Such an underqualified character for the role, but a job's for the boys. That's what it's always been seen as. Another Mike Ashley appointment, whereby added to that, the mafia behind the scenes. Joe Kinnear just slotted straight into that. His first press conferences were incredible. We all know about that. He soon became known as JFK instead of Joe Kinnear for various reasons. I think there'll be people like Simon Bird and others from the Mirror who'll tell you that story better than me. So yeah, we had that, but then we had the Talk Sport interviews where he decided to Charles Insomnia and Johan Kebab, and it was a few others, wasn't it? So
unbelievable.
We had all that. We've even had the rumours. Now, I don't know how true they are. We've had the rumours where he's been told to scout, but I've spotted a kid playing somewhere else, and it was Shane Ferguson, who was already on the books at Newcastle. And there's all these kind of strange and bizarre stories about Joe Kinnear. But ultimately, let's break it down. He was just an old man, a dinosaur, in a younger man's game. He was well past his best. Whatever his best might have been, even at his best, he wasn't good enough to be taking the Newcastle United job. So that was another absolutely unbelievable thing that Mike Ashley decided to do. And I noticed in the comments from a few minutes ago, somebody actually pointed this out, and I do stand by this, is the one thing that Mike Ashley's always done throughout this is he's never had somebody to help him make football decisions. And whoever he's trusted to give him advice has always been really, really poorly qualified to do so. There was talk at the time, and I've had this firmed up since from friends of associates of these people. Obviously, we had somebody like David Dean at Arsenal, who lives not far away from Mike Ashley, was somebody sounded out at the very start of his takeover process that could have come in and run the football business. Obviously, we've seen Chris Mort came in and that was trusted down to Dennis Wise and others. Then Derek Lambias was the man trusted with a role. But David Dean was the one originally sounded out. He didn't want to take that role at the time. And it just makes you think, if somebody who'd basically run Arsenal absolutely fantastically for so long had been able to come in, even if it was only for a few short years, and just steer the ship in the correct direction, I just don't believe half of the problems that Mike Ashley suffered over this 13 years would have happened. I think if he'd wanted to turn it around quickly, which I think he did, if he'd wanted to bring it in and improve the football club, if he'd employed the right people, he might have only been owner for a year, 2 years, and turned it on and made a really good profit on Newcastle United. Or if that hadn't been the case, we'd probably be sitting here in a much better position, and he could continue to run the football club as he does, but he would have money in the bank, essentially, because it'd be running properly, but they'd make proper decisions with that money. You wouldn't be trusting pen pushers who aren't qualified or ex-footballers who are mates of mates just to come in and make decisions over the head of managers. You wouldn't have had weird situations like that. You would have had a sustainably run football club making proper football decisions, not just business decisions. And I think that's probably the issue where it stems back. And somebody with the comments did say that, and I do definitely agree. Appointments like Keegan may not have happened, but also on the other side, appointments like Kinnear probably wouldn't have happened either. So I think you would have a more sustainable model as a football club, which Newcastle United, although financially sustainable over the 13 years, have not been a sustainable football club. Hence the 2 relegations, flirting with relegation on numerous other occasions. And one we'll come on to, the very famous one under John Carver, when they stayed up on the final day of the season. But yeah, I think Kinnear underlines and is probably up there in the top 2 or 3 decisions taken by Mike Ashley in his 13 years, which really stand out as absolute horror shows. So what we'd say next is we kind of go into another caretaker spell from Chris Hughton. And I don't want to dwell too much on his caretaker spells, because we know the difficulties of that period. He came in twice in a season when Newcastle United were a ship stuck in accelerate towards relegation that season, with a squad full of players that had quality, but they lacked real heart and direction, especially from above and on the pitch. That January really was an underlining. They made a couple of decent signings ultimately in Kevin Nolan and Ryan Taylor, both solid professionals, but selling players like I'm sure Charles Nzogby might have went that January. They also sold Shea Given. Shea Given was a massive loss. Shea Given was a constant throughout the period of success at Newcastle United, going back all the way to the Champions League debut season under Kenny Dalglish. He was always there. Shea Given had been all the way through the good Robson sides, and that was the final straw for him. He left for Man City for a relatively low fee, to be honest, for arguably the best shot stopper in the division. He had his faults in a way, but the best goalkeeper, and probably and arguably the best goalkeeper in Newcastle United's history, went for a fee of around £6 or £7 million. And that's the type of sale that happens to clubs that only go in one direction. It's the idea that it gives out. There could have been conversations there if Newcastle were determined to keep the club heading in the correct direction. And I think this would have happened under the previous owners. And it happens at other clubs where you won't sell the player in January. You'll just give them a promise and say, I understand you've been here a while. If you want to leave, you can leave in the summer. We'll not stand in your way, but you're going to stay here and keep us in this division. And it didn't happen. And that was a real issue for Newcastle United that season. And it was a sign of things to come, really. Although, like I say, they did actually make some positive signings in that January window. So Hughton, I'll go through the stats of his caretaker spells that season. So there were 2 separately. I've club them together. Because, like I say, I think it's unfair almost to judge him because the club was in such turmoil that season. So 9 games in 2 separate spells, 1 win, 2 draws and 6 defeats. So yeah, a real struggle as a caretaker, but that's nothing out of the norm because every single manager that season had a real struggle. I think arguably the best of the season was Joe Kinnear, but obviously he had the longest spell as well. That takes us on to another. It was the right appointment at the time, and it was. He wanted the job and he wanted to save his club, but it didn't turn out the way we all hoped it would. Alan Shearer. So Alan Shearer came in towards the end of that season. We all hoped he was going to be the white knight that came in. And by the way, there aren't many positives from this small period of Shearer management. But I don't by any means blame him. Like I've said previously, he was put onto a sinking ship. And I think he takes as much blame for that relegation as, say, example, Rafa Benitez in 2016, who didn't take any blame for me for that relegation. Because you can only do so much when a club's steering in one direction, and it takes a certain type of person, a firefighter, who can come in and really change things around in a short space of time. And I think Newcastle United were really, really struggling. 8 games in total, just the solitary win, 2 draws, 5 defeats, 12.5 win percentage over the course of his period. It was just too little too late. Far too little too late. And the takeaway I got from this period is, I can think back on the games. We beat Middlesbrough and everyone thought we were going to stay up. And then there was the Fulham game. And if I remember rightly, there was a goal disallowed. Kevin Nolan. I think it was a Viduka goal, actually. Kevin Nolan
was
on a goalkeeper. And it was just those kind of moments that see you relegated. And everyone remembers the final day. Obviously, where the animosity towards the rightful animosity towards Aston Villa. We've never done anything to them. And then we've seen all the sob on the Tyne rubbish in the stands. And it's no surprise there's not much love lost on Tyne's side when the two play each other. Because it was totally uncalled for. But we've seen the deflected goal off Damien Duff put Newcastle United down. But the damage was done. Newcastle United were struggling to get a result that day anyway against a decent Villa side. But the damage was done in the weeks previous and the months previous. And the lack of direction off the field really had an impact on proceedings on the field that season. And the thing I can take away, as I was going to say from Shearer, is that he was a man who was almost promised by the hierarchy that he would get the opportunity to have a go beyond that. And I think, again, it's another one of those whereby it was a disrespecting of a club legend. I think he at least deserved the opportunity to have a go at getting Newcastle back up. I'm not saying it would have worked. It may not have worked. He may not have been cut out in any way, shape or form. We're seeing Man United play out and drag something out simply because of emotion and because of a club hero with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. We've seen it with other football clubs before. It doesn't always work, but again, it's unfinished business. It's the idea that he never got the opportunity, and I think he probably admits that himself that he would have loved the chance to have taken Newcastle United forward and had a go. And he probably knows himself it may not have worked, but the idea that he only got 8 games on a sinking ship and then was promised the chance to have a go and then never, ever got given it because Newcastle United just aimlessly listed that summer, not signing players, not preparing the team for a season in the Championship. One we hadn't experienced for a long, long time. You've got to remember, we've been in the Premier League a long time. Since the early 90s. We had never been back to that division. And Newcastle was so ill-prepared that summer. A lot of sales, a lot of players went out the door. Very, very few came in through the door. And there was a constant uncertainty, if I remember back to that summer. We all felt that Shearer will. He'll get the chance. And then the longer the summer went on, it faded and faded. And it pretty much, Chris Hughton, in a lot of ways, an assistant at Tottenham, an assistant at Newcastle, we've talked about his 2 caretaker spells, kind of just floated and merged into the position of manager and was eventually given it on a permanent basis that season.
Before you get on to Hughton, I just want to ask, there's a lot of comments about the Shearer one, which is interesting because I thought there would have been comments about other people. But life goals makes a valid point. The players were mostly past their prime that season. Liam Smith, Butch, Duff, Carr, Owen, Viduka, Jeremy, Kasapa. I'm Ronaldo makes a valid point as well. Not many people expected Ian Dowie to come in as Shearer's number 2 that season, which was very strange. A lot of people expected Rob Lee would be a shoe-in, or a Chris Sutton, somebody who was really close to Alan, but it was Ian Dowie. No one really saw that coming. Funko Freddie and Andy Barr make the point about Joey Barton, of course, getting sent off at Liverpool. There was a lot being put on Joey Barton coming back into the team. He'd spent a spell in prison. He'd been injured. And, from our perspective, we were expecting to come back in and keep us up. But, he was hung out to dry, Alan, wasn't he, for me? And, I think it's a pity because we'll never really know, I don't think, what Alan Shearer could have been like as a manager, because he's never going to step back into that dugout. I don't think he'll ever do it.
No, and why would he? He's got a fantastic job now. He's got a great gig with the BBC, fantastic setup they've got there. Why would they break that up? There'll be a lot of years we'll see him on there because there's such a good relationship. Ian Wright, Gary Lineker. I don't imagine he would take himself out of that quite cushy position and other things he's got going on behind the scenes to step back into the fire pit of Newcastle United. Now, that's not saying by any means that he won't step into the football club in some capacity in the future. We've seen all the rubbish talked about the Bellegraph Nova, or he'll be back in as manager. Well, we all know that that's a load of rubbish. It would never happen. He probably wouldn't want it. But I could see him definitely. I've talked about Keegan before, some kind of ambassadorial role. And Shearer has that. I mean, you mentioned Newcastle United anywhere around the world, the Far East, North America, South America. The first name that people mention back to you is Alan Shearer. People recognise the name almost before Newcastle United because he was it's easy to forget how big a world star Alan Shearer was when we signed him. He was the best striker on the planet, arguably, in the mid-90s when Newcastle United signed him. And everyone remembers that. He was a fantastic, fantastic footballer. And it is just so sad that his club, the club that he loves, the club that he served so well for so long, ended up treating him the way that they did, is quite sad. And there is unfinished business there. And I would love to think under new ownership that Alan Shearer will be given the dues that he deserves at Newcastle United.
Jump on the Facebook page if you join the group. NUFC Matters. We've got a vote going on there. Joe Kinnear still miles ahead. Steve McClaren in second place and John Carver in third place for worst managers of Newcastle United of all time. So yes, before I interrupted you in your flow, you were on to Chris Hughton. You had 2 caretaker spells, but as you say, he more or less flowed into this position when it became apparent that Alan Shearer wasn't going to be given the opportunity to continue.
Yeah, and his managerial period, that pre-season, everybody points towards that one game, and it was a real galvanising factor in Newcastle United season that year. And it was the hammering at Leyton Orient. Obviously, there was a few choice words said in that dressing room, and I think this is where Chris Hughton doesn't get the credit maybe that he deserves. Is that we all look at the strong characters in that dressing room, and we know the characters that dragged Newcastle United through that championship season towards winning the title in 09-10. But I think Hughton does deserve some credit for that because he allowed that to happen and he managed that dressing room right, because it's okay saying you've got strong characters to lead left, right and centre, but you've also got to lead that yourself. You can't let certain voices take too much credence. You can't let them overtake others. It was quite a good, really difficult balancing act, all of the uncertainty that was going on. Players coming, players go. Well, not many coming, but lots going. And lots of players who maybe some didn't want to be there. And then pulling all of that together, that core of players that season. Smiths, Bartons, Butts, Nolan, Carroll, there was Harper. There was a load of players who really pulled that dressing room together, and it wasn't easy that season. It's another thing that everybody looks back on because it's ended. It was such a fantastic. It was a romp basically that season towards the end. Newcastle was so dominant in the division, But it wasn't easy at the start. It was a struggle. Newcastle United had the crowds were lower. They weren't huge. I remember I think it was played Sheffield Wednesday at the start of that season at home, and it was quite a low crowd. It was in around 39,000. People had been turned off by the season before at Newcastle United, but Newcastle started getting the results. They really put results together. It was a scrape. Amiobi scored a lot of goals at the start of that season, but it was a real scrape getting through the games. And then we've seen it was a 3-horse race, if I remember rightly. Nottingham Forest were up there. Obviously, West Brom and Newcastle all fighting for the promotion. And then I always point that season towards January. I think Newcastle they only signed one player at the start of that season. It was brought in Fabrice Pancrat, who scored that fantastic one-off goal against Watford in the home game. But I always point towards the January, and I think Newcastle United were in a real 3-horse race at that period. And they went out and signed 2 key players who turned Newcastle United from being in the mix to above the mix quite quickly. And one was Mike Williamson. They signed a proper defender when they needed a defender. And the other was Wayne Routledge. And I still stand by this thing. The signing of Wayne Routledge in that January added a bit of pace and dynamism on the out wide that Newcastle did not have in their squad at that period of time. And I think it really kicked Newcastle United on in that January. And as we know, we'll go to the stats because that's what we're doing this on. So the period, obviously, we know Hughton's period goes beyond that. It was that season and the start of the next Premier League season. So we'll say it was 64 games in all competitions in total, 38 wins, 11 draws and 15 defeats. Of all the managers in Mike Ashley's time, Chris Hughton has the highest win percentage of any by quite some distance. He's 59.38%. Ticks in his box the promotion that season. And then after that as well, I mean, that summer they changed model. They were moving away from the old model, and they were allowing people like Graham Carr to start having a really prominent role in signing footballers. We've seen the likes of Czech Tiote brought in that summer, Johan Kabay. Who else did we see? Yeah, we've seen Hatem Ben Arfa was the other one. These type of players were brought in by Graham Carr, scouted from all over Europe, and they turned out to be fantastic footballers for Newcastle United. And Chris Hughton started that season. They started really, really well. I remember Hatem Ben Arfa's debut goal. I think it was his debut against Everton. It was an absolute raker. And I remember watching that game and thinking, wow, what have we got on our hands here? Fantastic talent. The Aston Villa game at the start of the season is another real tick in Chris Hughton's box because of what had gone on a season and a half before, because of the sob on the tyne. That 6-goal victory at St James's Park that day is the thing dreams are made of. It was absolutely magic. And anybody who was there that day will know the feeling. It was an unbelievable game. It was another big tick in Chris Hughton's managerial box at Newcastle. The exit is the next one I want to talk about with Chris Hughton. Because we've looked at the stats. We said he had a really high win percentage. He helped galvanise, played a big part in that, in getting the promotion. And then was almost really just cast aside midway through that first season. Cast aside totally, was overlooked for a return to what we'd seen previously. And this was the problem that Newcastle United fans had at the time, if I remember right. It was just the appointment of Alan Pardew instead of Chris Hughton, sacking Chris Hughton, bringing in Alan Pardew, felt exactly like the Joe Kinnear one previously, the bringing in of Dennis Wise. It felt like the addition to the Cockney Mafia. It felt like somebody else coming in who didn't deserve to be there, but was getting shooed in because they were a Mike Ashley pal or had some kind of business association or gambling association, as the rumours go, that with Mike Ashley. That Pardew reign he didn't deserve the job at the time. He'd been booted by Southampton, if I remember rightly, who were 2 divisions below Newcastle. He'd done nothing previously in his career to suggest he deserved the job, but this is nothing new. Like I said, we've seen that with Kinnear previously, potentially even Allardyce previous to that too, as Mike Ashley managers. And on Hughton, before I go in depth on the stats on Alan Pardew, because Alan Pardew was the longest serving manager of Mike Ashley's 13 and a half years on Tyneside. But Hughton, although I think he deserves credit in some ways, I think his exit and his win percentage was fantastic, but his exit did just leave us such a bitter taste in the mouth of Newcastle United fans, and was another one why he's so well liked. Whenever Chris Hughton comes back to Tyneside, he's such a nice man. He'll never say a bad word about Newcastle ever, because he loved his time here. And Newcastle United fans really, really enjoyed his time as manager, because it did bring so much success, albeit at a lower level, then and carried on into the Premier League season. But yeah, I think Chris Hughton, had he been allowed to stay for 2 or 3 years, could have made a really big job of the Newcastle job. I think it's fair to say that the managerial roles he's had since he's left have probably proven that he has limitations as a manager, and I think that's fair to say. And it does make you wonder that maybe he should have got more of an opportunity, but change probably would have come at some point. The problem is change would not have been for somebody like an Alan Pardew, who managed to squeeze another 4 or 5 years out of football management somehow after he left Newcastle United, because of the in some ways reasonable success at times under Pardew. So Alan Pardew, 185 games in total as Newcastle United manager, 71 wins, 41 draws and 73 defeats. That's a 38.3 win percentage over the course. Another really, really, really controversial time. We all lived it. We lived through that. It was the biggest problem with Alan Pardew was that he was almost seen as so grateful to have been given an opportunity at such a football club. At that time, he'd put together a decent squad of players, had just been promoted, were riding the crest of a wave. He was handed a fantastic football club to walk into, but it really was. It was turgid again at times. Newcastle United would go on amazing runs of getting results, but then Pardew seemed like a type of manager who was incapable of turning runs of defeats around. We've seen some horrendous 5-6 losing game streaks quite regularly under Alan Pardew. And it was mostly during that time Newcastle United were in and around the average position that they have under Mike Ashley, which would be a 13th, 12th in the Premier League, but did flirt with relegation on occasions. The one key that always stands out in all of this, there's a couple of key moments I'll pick out for me in Pardew's time, is obviously the 4-4 draw. Just bringing a draw out of the draws of defeat against Arsenal was absolutely fantastic. And again, it's another one of those I was there moments for that game, for that Czech TOA goal, and an unforgettable time in a way for a lot of Newcastle United fans. And the 5th place season, that 5th place season was quite something. It really was. And that was one of the brief periods that we've ever had in the last decade and a half where we've kind of felt associated with what we knew before under a Keegan or a Robson, where towards the end of that season, particularly when we signed Papi Cisse, Newcastle United felt like we could go and beat anybody. I would argue that I've not seen a striker come in, especially not in Newcastle, and have the impact that Papi Cisse did for that 6 months when he signed in the January and drove Newcastle on to finishing just outside the Champions League spots. Just was so close. An incredible striker who would just everything he hit was there for his debut goal. Came on against Aston Villa and scored a cracker. And then Chelsea goals, everything he touched turned to gold for that 6 months. Obviously, again, he had his limitations and didn't quite deliver that kind of level for much longer. But there were so many things in the Pardew reign that just jarred with Newcastle United fans. He was an Ashley apologist, really, because there were times when results would go Newcastle United's way, and he would try and butter the owner up and mention him in post-match interviews, which really, really got to Newcastle United fans. Just knowing the recent history of Newcastle United under Mike Ashley and Pardew probably would have thought twice about saying something like that. I can see why he did it. He wanted to try and get the best that he could. Somebody mentioned there in the comments that the really ridiculous long contract, the headbutt. Yes, there were absolutely bizarre times under Pardew. An egotist. He was a very egotistical manager, and I don't think that kind of character really sat very well with the Geordie faithful. I don't think we ever warmed to him in particular. But like I say, he wasn't actually, in terms of statistics, the worst manager we've had, and was by quite some distance the longest serving. Had more than 40 odd games more than Rafa Benitez, who is the second longest serving manager in Mike Ashley's 13 years. But Newcastle, that season, I go back to that year, the 5th place. They finished just outside of the Champions League. And this is the sliding door moment. And there's been plenty in Mike Ashley's time, but when you're in a position of strength, you should go and strengthen. That's the way you get stronger. You don't sit still. And Newcastle United went backwards that summer when they signed Vernon and Anita. They knew they were going to have to play a whole host of more games across the lengths of Europe, up, down, left, right, and they didn't. They didn't go out there and get 3 or 4 quality players who were added to the really good group that they had at that time. They signed one. Vernon Anita was okay, a versatile player, was never really good enough to be a Premier League midfielder. Ended up filling in, doing a job in the Championship right back and doing it quite well in that final season that he was at Newcastle. But yeah, it was so strange. But we had some positives that year. That year we nearly got relegated that year, but we went to the quarter final of the Europa League. I was living away at the time, working journalistically elsewhere. But I was coming back for every single home game of that Europa League campaign when I could. I was getting the train down from Scotland that day and then getting the earliest train back the next day so I could be back in for work. It was a fantastic time. You just wanted to be a part of it. Anzi, they scored really late. Papi Cisse, Benfica, I stand by this day. We should have beat them that quarter final and we would have been in the semi-finals. Yeah. It really felt like we were pushing towards something when I think he brought Hughton Ben Arfa off the bench and we really had them on the ropes, but we just couldn't get that goal that we required to really put the pressure on. But it was an enjoyable season. Anybody who went to those games away from home, went to Bruges, went to other places, it felt like Bordeaux. It felt like the old days again. It felt like what we'd become used to through the 90s and early noughties, that Newcastle United were a club that were back in Europe, and every other year at least we'd always be back in Europe. We'd be going on these trips and going along into European competitions, which is what we've become accustomed to. In a lot of ways, it's what I grew up with, which is why it's so sad to this day that the saddest thing in the Mike Ashley era is that there's people growing up now who believe what we see now and we have for the past few years is the norm. That's not our norm. That's not Newcastle United fans' norm. Yes, we've had bad times for older generations, but that's not Newcastle United's norm, is what Mike Ashley served up. But Pardew, yeah, again, some positives, but I'll always come back to the idea that he was the yes man, Mike Ashley's yes man, and that never, ever endeared him to Newcastle United fans.
So no, I'd agree, mate, 100%. Yeah, he's, he was like Marmite for a lot of people. But if he was chocolate, he would have eaten himself. I think you summed it up rather well there as well. So, from my perspective, not the worst manager at all that we've had. Had a degree of success, certainly had the dressing room, and from my perspective, probably one of the better ones with hindsight under Ashley. But a lot of fans, and I think we need to remember this, a lot of fans turned on him, and there was that well orchestrated social media. It's probably the first time we've seen a social media campaign by supporters at Newcastle. Get Pardew out. A lot of people wanted him out of the club. I wasn't one of them. I never supported that. I was always very conscious of who we might end up getting back, getting through the door next. But yeah, from my perspective, certainly not the worst.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And that Pardew, I've got to say, I was one who did, because I always thought we can be better than that. And you always hope you can be better, but you're right. You are very right in being cautious as who might walk through the door. And he didn't really walk through the door. He was another one who was just brought in because he was already there, and it was John Carver. Now, John Carver, because of that 20-game period that he had, I'll go through the stats first. 20 games as Newcastle United manager, 3 wins, 4 draws, and 13 defeats. Of any manager that had double figures of games, he's by far and away the lowest win percentage in total, 15%. that end of season, Newcastle United, when Pardew, it was a weird end to the Pardew one because everybody wanted him out. But in the end, he ended up going to a club who actually, who basically poached him from his contract at Newcastle United, and he was allowed to leave. So it wasn't the end that everybody kind of expected it might be. And John Carver stepped into the top job. Gets a really bad press because of that. Because of the end to the season. Like I say, 3 wins in 20 towards the end of the season in all competitions. Newcastle went from being relatively safe in mid-table to not looking like they could grab a point from anywhere and really being dragged in those final weeks of the season into a relegation fight that wasn't theirs to fight and they were ill-prepared for. And that was basically because of Carver's tutelage. Really, he couldn't get a tune out of his players towards the end of that season. Now, I'm not saying by any means they were world beaters at the time and they had their struggles, but I do stand by the idea. I think if Pardew had probably stayed that season, it would have been par for the course. They probably would have flirted with it and then stayed out of it. Newcastle United could have been relegated on the final day of that season. Really, really struggled, and the tail of it all was Jonas Gutierrez. Coming back from his cancer battles, it turned into legal battles with Newcastle United. It was such a messy affair, and a really sad episode in Newcastle United's recent history was the treatment of Jonas Gutierrez, a player who might not have always had the best quality in terms of what he would produce, but could produce magic, but always gave 100%. He was a 110% player. Playing well wherever you played him, out on the left, on the right, anywhere. You played him anywhere. He was fantastic. I really was a big fan of Jonas. And I think him scoring on that final day was another one of those I was there moments. It was such a magical moment to see him score and keep Newcastle United in the division. But Newcastle should never have ever been in that position. And I think Carver was rightly peddled that summer because it's hard. John Carver is a coach who I know people my age who've been coached by John Carver through the Centre of Excellence and the Academy and things like that, and people who've done coaching courses with him, and they'll tell you speak to them and they loved him. Said a fantastic coach, a fantastic man, really good coaching brain, not just to pick up the Cohen's idea that some Newcastle United fans hold him to. Never a manager though, and I think that was proven. But the best, look, there's the comments, the best coach in the world thing. It does get slightly twisted in the context. I can see where he was coming from. He says, well, I've got to think I'm the best manager because I am, I can see that inner strength. You've got to say that. Saying it out loud was a bit silly though. I think he probably should have just kept that to himself. And he hung himself out to dry really when they were struggling so much on the pitch and struggled in the end. And it was never.
He always kept mentioning. He always kept mentioning Sir Bobby as well, didn't he?
Yeah, and you need to be your own man, which is the criticism I've got of Steve Bruce at the moment. Keep going back to Rafa Benitez. You only cheapen your own qualities. You shouldn't be mentioning that. And it's the same. John Carver should have just said, "Okay, lads, I'm not going to answer any questions about that. I love Sir Bobby, whatever, but I'm dealing with this situation now. Sir Bobby's not here, and I'm going to deal with this." But that's a problem. A trap a lot of managers have fallen into. And as a journalist, of course, you want those lines, a great copy. Of course, you do. But managers have got to be a bit more astute. And I think John Carver really shot himself in the foot with a number of his comments. Again, you said you were really worried about what would come next. And even after Carver, could it get any worse? Yeah, well, it could. John Carver was rubbish, but you've seen someone like Steve McClaren who came in next, who was arguably just as bad, slightly improved, was given a lot of investment in his side, didn't have a massive say in that investment, of course, but we've seen players like Gini Wijnaldum come in, had a good goal scoring season. I'll be careful to say had a good goal scoring season there, not a good season. Alexander Mitrovic, and not, the same decent players. Florian Thauvin was a player that should never have ever ended up in Newcastle United. Lots of talent brought in, but probably just promised to the wrong man, which is what we've seen again in recent years. Good investment, 31 games, 7 wins, 6 draws, 18 defeats, a 22.5 win percentage. The highlights for me of that relatively brief McClaren era the Norwich game. I was there that day. The Norwich game was absolutely fantastic. 6-2, was it 6-2?
Yeah.
A real quality game. I think Wijnaldum might have got a hat-trick that day, or he might have got 4. Mitrovic scored a lovely goal. He got 4. Mitrovic scored a lovely goal with his left foot when he broke through at the Leazes end. It was a really good positive game, but those positives were really few and far between under McClaren. There weren't many at all. He was given a little bit of money in the January, bringing his own players, which is something we've seen under Bruce as well. Ashley flipping between his model and his allowing his managers to do something. Brought in okay players, John Joe Shelby, and you've mentioned Marmite characters. He's another Marmite character, but has served the club reasonably well in his time, being here for quite some time. And then Andros Townsend, another player who has unfinished business at Newcastle United for me, was a player that really excelled towards the end of that season. Benitez wanted to keep him, who came in after McClaren, but it just never. He wanted his England place. He never got that back. I'm just looking at the comments now. I'll elaborate on Tovan. All right then. So it was the stories of the time that Arsene Wenger had a conversation with Steve McClaren and said, basically, you need to come to me when you sign these type of players. This was after they played Arsenal at the start of that season, because I know all there is to know about the French game, and I would have told you immediately, do not sign that boy, because it's like take him from home, he will not perform. And it's funny the way that his career's panned out, that he has had to go back to Marseille to really start getting rave reviews again. He's a home bird and would never have performed outside the box. And McClaren's answer to that was, well, I didn't sign him. Which just tells that it was all part of this signing model, and McClaren was just giving the players do something with them. And you know what, that can work. There's clubs all over the world have that kind of model, whereby they'll sign players for managers, and then as long as they're a decent coach, they'll get a tune out of them, or they'll sign players for systems that the club always have, your Barcelonas, etc. It's not going to work in Newcastle when there's no system and no coaching ability, particularly. So you could have given him any player and he wouldn't have got a tune out of him. But that Tovan one is one that particularly sticks with me. That even the doyen of French football in Arsene Wenger, who knew everything there was to know about French kids and French players, knew exactly, do not sign that boy because he'll just not perform. And I think I remember rightly going back to the time that he never really wanted to sign. They tried to sign him previously. He'd gone elsewhere when he did sign for Marseille, and Newcastle eventually got him a year after. He just didn't want... He was a talented boy, but just was never, ever wanting to leave France, never, ever wanting to come to Newcastle in particular. Could have worked, never worked. And Arsene Wenger certainly, if Steve McClaren could have picked the phone up to him and asked him, he would have been able to tell Graham Carr that please just stay away from this one. But obviously, that's a story for another time. Never ever happened. I'm reluctant to keep any longer because it's been over an hour, Steve. McClaren, right? So we've got McClaren out of the way. Then the main man, the most decorated manager that has ever managed Newcastle United. And now I know he's got his critics, and I'm not an absolute Benitez champion. I criticise him as well, but I've seen the way the man worked up close and personal, and that was such a massive missed opportunity for this football club. This football club now, had he stayed and been given what he wanted, I honestly believe he would have steadily climbed Newcastle United up this table, and we would have been fighting in and around where you see your Everton and Wolves now. And I think we wouldn't have quite had the investment. That's not exactly what he wasn't asking for an open checkbook. He just wanted to be able to do things his way. You do things Rafa's way, you get results. Just ask anywhere that he's managed, anywhere he's been. Do it Rafa's way, results will come. And that there was only ever fleeting glances of that at Newcastle that results were coming. In stats, Benitez, 146 games, the second longest serving manager of Mike Ashley's 13 years, 62 wins, 31 draws and 53 defeats, 42.47 win percentage. So when you look at it in that sense, it was not much more of a higher win percentage than a Pardew. It was a win percentage which was lower than Hughton, but obviously considerably higher than a Bruce, Allardyce, Keegan, Kinnear and others. I don't think that tells the full story of Benitez. I think you have to have understand the man, the manager, the methods to really get why Benitez was such a missed opportunity. But in a lot of ways, and this might sound controversial, but this is my opinion, having dealt with him quite closely, is that I think in a lot of ways in his years on Tyneside, he was his own worst enemy at Newcastle United. I think he could have got more results had he played the game with Mike Ashley a little. He didn't want to. He was very stubborn. It was very much Rafa's way or no way. And that was the problem. And you strike up against it was two forces hitting together. It was Mike Ashley's way or nobody's way. And for that reason, that Benitez never got the money. He never got the players. He wouldn't allow Graham Carter to sign players. Then Steve Nixon's model, he wouldn't allow that to happen. And you know what? I don't argue with it. His way is the right way in his eyes, and that's fine. And if you bring somebody in like that, you have to accept that they want carte blanche to do exactly what they want and not be dictated to by anybody. He wasn't asking for an open checkbook. He was just asking for more control and to be able to sign the players that he wanted to sign, that he'd already lined up, he'd already had in talks. Numerous occasions. Andros Townsend, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, Tammy Abraham. You can name numerous players who would have been Newcastle United players had Rafa Benitez just been allowed to crack on and do what he wanted to do. But never happened. He ended up having to scrape around for people. Can we sign this player? No. This one? No. It was going down the list. And he ended up signing players like Josselus and pulling rabbits out of the hat like Dubravkas and Mikel Morenos. And just because he had such a fantastic contact base in Europe, really did a fantastic job. And I always think it's just a real sad episode again that we never got to see the real Rafa Benitez. We never got to see what a Rafa Benitez backed to bring the players he wanted to and shape his team could do. Really sad, and obviously ended the way it ended. We've seen a promotion, a really solid side, solid defensively, but better than this current team in an attacking sense as well, despite people's perceptions. But the battles were tiresome. Let's not forget that. It really was. In the run up every window, we all there was a sinking feeling because we knew that there was going to be the battles, that he wouldn't get what he wanted, but he was going to battle to try and get there. And it was so disheartening every window. And like I say, the trust died in that relationship after the first full summer. He got what he wanted. Then Mike Ashley turned around in January and said, you're not signing anybody, you've got who you wanted. And those were two, you've got enough to get promoted. And Benitez's argument was that, no, I can sign Premier League ready players. I'm going to save you money in the summer because I'm bringing Premier League ready players in. Ruben Loftus-Cheek was one, and Andros Townsend was the other. Yes, they would have had to pay slightly more than they'd sold Townsend for, but Benitez could take him straight into his team and his system, and he knew he had a player that would play well for Newcastle for 3-4 years. You still see it now. Townsend's an automatic pick for Crystal Palace, who are fighting in the same battles as Newcastle United every season. So he would have done a good job. We all know that. And Ruben Loftus-Cheek, again, fantastic footballer that Newcastle probably could have went and signed this time had they not got so much dead wood on their books from these pathetic models that they stick to. And Graham Carter, even Henri Saive and people like this and are still hanging around from Graham Carter eras of days gone by. And I'll bring finally onto Steve Bruce. So we'll go through the stats of Steve Bruce. Sorry if I've skimmed over Benitez a bit there, but a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, you can't, you kind of drag it on. There's, I've got the wrong photo up. Sorry. There we go.
48 games for Steve Bruce. 16 wins, 14 draws, 18 defeats in all competitions. Again, a 33.3 win percentage. What do you say about Steve Bruce? What do you say? It's such a hard time to analyse because it just feels like the team carries so much luck, but somebody can't be lucky all the time. And he has said that himself, 20 years, can he be so lucky? Of course, he hasn't won anything, so he can't have been that lucky. But he does seem to have carried quite a bit of luck at Newcastle United. The cup runs stand out. They've had decent cup runs under Bruce. Some very, very good draws, to be fair. Again, it's something that ticks the luck box. One thing he hasn't taken credit for, which definitely does deserve credit, and I'm going to point out in a brief analysis of Bruce, is that the transfer change. So there's been a change in approach and transfers this summer. And very, very few people, apart from Rafa Benitez in that first summer, have been able to implement that kind of change at Newcastle United under Mike Ashley and the models and the financial modelling that they work under. And I think he does deserve some credit for that. I think bringing the Premier League proven experience in Callum Wilson and others, at the age of 28, type of players Newcastle United have not signed. Refused to sign Rondon for similar money a few years ago, simply because he didn't have a sell-on value. Well, neither is Callum Wilson going to have in 2-3 years' time when he's into his 30s. I would say the biggest problem that Bruce has had, if Bruce had come after McClaren, I'm not saying would have come back up, obviously, but if Bruce had come after McClaren, having been Hughton, Pardew, Carver as a runner manager previous to that as well, then I don't think there would have been as much negativity. Yeah. I think there is a lot of negativity towards Bruce because he is not Rafa. We've basically been given it a little taste of what having a top-class manager again can be. And we're going back to the status quo, effectively, in somebody like Bruce. In fact, that's probably not fair. He probably has a better pedigree than a McClaren, a Carver, a Pardew, a Hughton. So we're probably slightly better than the status quo of Mike Ashley's Newcastle United. But I think the problem with Bruce ultimately is that he is not Benitez. He does not employ the same tactics, the same systems, the same diligence in terms of what the role that he has and what he wants his players to do, and a clear idea on what the club should be and a direction from top to bottom, from academy all the way up to the top. Benitez brought that, had his coaches all over, and I just don't think Bruce fits into that category. And I think that's probably his biggest problem. But I don't buy in the idea that all Newcastle United fans want Steve Bruce to fail. I think that's such a tired narrative that some people have on social media. And I've seen a few people mention rants. I'm going to go on one again here. So for me, nobody wants... I don't know any Newcastle United fans who want Steve Bruce to fail, but they say it as they say it. And if they don't think he's very good, they're going to criticise him. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean they want him to fail. I can still say we've been rubbish at the start of the season at times. Do I still want him to go and win the League Cup? Of course we do. I'd love to win the League Cup, and I'd love to say at the end of the season, I'm rubbish at times, but you know what? We've got a trophy. I don't even care anymore. And I think most Newcastle fans are exactly the same as me. So this tired idea that, I think Newcastle, like I've seen even some journalists say it online, is that it's as if Newcastle fans want their team to fail. They don't. But they're okay to criticise somebody when they've seen better and expect better and deserve better, aren't getting the product at the end of the day. And I don't think Bruce's Newcastle United have really given too much in terms of excitement in the long term. Again, finally, I will point to another little thing last season. I think last season stood up to me for had some of the biggest moments almost of the season. So we had, I don't know whether it was because everything else was so bad, as in the games were so bad, but there were so many little mini moments. Almiron's goal, that Almiron first goal was such a fantastic moment. Then we had Matty Longstaff. That was such a fantastic moment. Isaac Hayden, such a fantastic one-off moment. There were lots of mini moments in that season which were really memorable and live long in the memory for Newcastle United fans, but the season itself as a whole will not. So that's ultimately... It could be why we look on those moments as being so special, because everything else was so difficult. But yeah, Steve Bruce in total, a lot to prove. But ultimately, it's not Rafa Benitez, and Newcastle United fans see it for what it is.
Liam, fantastic job there, mate. Superb to hear your stats and the vote which has been taking place on the NUFC Matters group. Who has been the worst manager during Mike Ashley's ownership of Newcastle United? Had an early runner, and that person never looked back, to be honest. Joe Kinnear has won by a landslide. He is the worst Newcastle United manager of all time under Ashley, according to everyone who voted today. Over 140 votes for Joe Kinnear. Steve McClaren came in second place. A fair distance off, it has to be said. The rest of the votes were shared around between Steve McClaren, who was in second, John Carver, who was in third, Steve Bruce, probably the only one who gained and changed positions. He's gone into fourth place, followed by Sam Allardyce. And after that, only a couple of votes for Rafa and one for Alan Shearer. They're not Mackems who voted, it has to be said. Interestingly enough, Alan Pardew never received a vote. And when you think about the vociferous campaign that was, aimed towards Alan Pardew, I find that the most interesting statistic, that he never got a vote today. And I know it's only a small cross section of Newcastle fans in our group, but I find that absolutely fantastic to see that Alan Pardew didn't get voted, once there today by anybody.
Quite incredible that, like you say, when you think of the Pardew out campaigns, all the issues that he had when Newcastle United fans, like I say, his character jarred so much when Newcastle United fans during his time here. The Ashley apologist idea, the struggles, the long winless runs. Everyone forgets about that so easily. We used to go on terrible runs in the Pardew, and we could not turn them round, and we always flirted with relegation because of that. But had decent players as well. They were a decent side under Pardew in terms of personnel, and obviously had that Europa League run. But yeah, I don't think anybody watching the show or taking part can argue that Joe Kinnear is by far and away the worst manager. Statistically, he isn't. John Carver is statistically the worst. Or if you want to go people under 10 games, Alan Shearer would be statistically the worst. But I think Joe Kinnear, in all told, in all the circumstances of that season, can quite happily go as number one of Mike Ashley's really poor appointments in my eyes.
And I'm sure that if he heard this programme, he'd send us a load of expletives just like he did to Simon Bird. So, Joe Kinnear wins today. Liam, give us a quick plug for where people can find more of your material and the journalist side of things.
Yeah, so just give it a shout at my Twitter is at Liam J Kennedy 23. You guys can find us on there. We do a subscription model. I work for the Shields Gazette. We don't rely on clicks. We don't need clicks. So we're very much not into the clickbait idea. But we do need people reading my stories, and we do need people paying for our stories. So if you like the kind of thing that I've done on here, you like the things I do on a Tuesday night with Steve, and you like the columns and takeover stories and transfer stuff that I produced this summer, then please just help out. It's not expensive. It's ultimately where the industry's going. You're going to have to pay for your content in future. Nothing comes for free, although it has for a long time in the journalist game. But it's through people like Steve that are building a profile and we're keeping the industry going.
Yeah, great stuff, mate. It's always good to check out what's going on the Shields Gazette website, so get yourself over to there as well. Just a quick shout out for the t-shirts, newcastlelegends.com, selling really well. Big thanks to Q-Tech, shop.co.uk, who have been providing them for people who asked for them. So nice to know that people want to walk around with NUFC matters on a t-shirt. It's really nice. But big thanks to Q-Tech, shop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend. And a shout out to our other sponsor, Darren Baldwin Funerals, local independent family business, 24-hour service, who have been our main sponsor through the last few weeks. So thanks for him for paying for the StreamYard connection. And iTunes and Spotify are a place you can find our podcasts. NUFC Matters podcasts are available for free on there as well. Plenty of content, as always, on the channel. We still do 7 shows a week, 1 each day, and sometimes chip in an extra one as well. And I'm back tomorrow night with Ladies' Night at the later time of 7:30. And always good to hear what Kendall, Sav, Katie and Samantha have got to say about Newcastle United. And we do have a Christmas party planned at the Tyneside Irish Centre, Friday the 4th of December. 30 tickets left now. An evening with the team of NUFC Matters. Liam's going to pop along. We're hoping, if COVID related, we can get Malcolm and Gibbo along as well. And some of the lads and lasses who you see on the regular shows. I'll be doing a live Q&A with Lee Clark, who's obviously been on the show quite a bit over the last few months. And we'll have raffles and auctions. And the money is all going to the food bank, the Newcastle Food Bank, at a time when things will be getting worse for the food bank. I've got no doubt. So that money will come as a big help to them. I'm now going to go off and get me Sunday dinner. Liam will be back on Tuesday night at 6 o'clock till 7. to look ahead to Newcastle's Manchester United game. And by the looks of it, Liam, we're going to have plenty to talk about with the latest leaks coming out of the Premier League, talking about potentially going down to a league of 18. And that means that Newcastle United might place in the Premiership might be in jeopardy. So be interesting to see how that develops over the next 48 hours before we're back together again.
Quite incredible, isn't it? The transformative state that football finds itself in. There's so many uncertainties when it was such a certain industry. It was an industry heading in one direction, but all of a sudden it seems to be in turmoil. So we'll talk more on Tuesday, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, look forward to it, mate. Enjoy your Sunday dinner and your time with the family. Speak to you then, mate. Take care. Bye, Liam.
Yes.